Well, each of you should feel accomplished at this point because you've made it to day 5. And so you're at about mile 23 of the marathon. So hang in there, get that last push of energy right over the finish line. But again, thank you all for being here today, everyone online. And my presentation, maybe I had a little bit, or let me back up. And for anyone, I'm Jonathan Duran from the state of Arkansas. And I might have had a little bit of some selfish motivations here because this is mainly about the things we've been doing over the past year to prepare ourselves for this big thing called Next Generation 9-1-1. And my selfish motives might be that any of you here in the room or anyone out there online will see something and that we've been working on, and you'll say, yeah, don't do that. Don't do that, because we tried that and yeah, it just didn't work. But yeah, here's what we did. It worked great. So yeah, maybe I'll find one of those golden eggs somewhere along here. But yes, I did intentionally call this Snow Lake. There is a little bit of irony there for some place in Arkansas to be called Snow Lake. Oops. Good. We're not advancing. Uh-oh. I'm hitting the wrong button. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of background on where we've been, Next Generation 9-1-1 or 9-1-1 coordination in Arkansas is a fairly new thing for us. Any form of statewide coordination only goes back to a couple of years ago, 2019, when Act 660 in our legislature was passed, and it was no small feat given what all is in it. But that was the sort of the birth of 9-1-1 coordination in Arkansas. And so among other things that it did, it created our state 9-1-1 board, and we were lucky enough that by statute, the state GIO is a sitting member of our state 9-1-1 board. So that was a real win for us. And among various other purposes, not including a fee change, things like that. But it also, it's in the legislation that states that the 9-1-1 board should essentially prepare the state for Next Generation 9-1-1 and to develop that. And so then in July, about a year after that is when we inked our agreement. So the GIS office inked our agreement with our 9-1-1 board for preparing those data sets that were obviously necessary in that system. Okay, now we got it. So our first question was, okay, we're doing this, so how are we going to get there? Well, and that sign there was not far off from reality in our thinking. And so, we just, okay, we got to start somewhere. What are we going to do? So we focused on those boundaries that are specified in the NENA standard that we all are very familiar with. Our PSAP boundaries, of course, we had a statewide PSAP boundary data set, but it wasn't all that great. And we knew it wasn't all that great because it was created for other purposes several years ago and had never really been maintained. And then also we wanted to focus on our emergency services boundaries. And those span the gamut of, we had nothing, say, for law enforcement, nothing. EMS, we really had nothing. Our fire boundary, we had a statewide fire districts layer, but it's largely jurisdictional type things. It doesn't really reflect those actual response and dispatch realities. So where we started is we print old school approach. We came up with a fairly standard map template and started printing. And so over the course of the last year, we planned out about 28 of these local engagement meetings. And it's essentially take these e-sized maps, take a stack of them out to a county somewhere. We usually would bring together 2 to 4 counties at a time, just kind of depending what we were trying to do. But we did those because we knew we wanted to get all that out of the way within a year's time. And so really old school, e-size maps, we hand out 4 different colors of Sharpies. The red Sharpie is a fire fire response changed. A blue Sharpie, law enforcement, and so on. You know, we at the very beginning of that, we tried, you know, hey, we're geeks, we're GIS people. Let's make an online map. We had some limited success with that, but what has really worked is, you know, that right there, really being right there with those local folks. I think, yeah, it's me there on the right hand side, but we've got 5 of those left, thank goodness, because we have kept the roads hot over the course of the past year. So really what we had to drill into our local folks is that, you know, they have to rewire their brains and unlearn what they have learned, because we're all so used to dealing with these lines that follow county boundary or city boundary and things like that. But we all know that emergencies don't stop at a county boundary or some other administrative boundary. And it's so drilled into everybody's head. And we had one of these meetings, and I thought we were going to have a revolt, because one of the folks with one of the fire districts stood up, and this particular person was the county fire services coordinator. Whoa, you can't change our fire district boundaries. We're like, no, that's not what at all what we're doing. And we were able to get through that simply because, you know, we said, you know, look, this is about which fire truck, which ambulance, whatever, can get there the fastest, not what boundary necessarily you're in on this jurisdictional type thing. Because in Arkansas, these fire districts have probably as much to do with how fees are collected as much as they do anything. So, hey, I couldn't resist not including this picture. You know, since Shelby wasn't able to be here this week, but I mean, we're right there. I think what Shelby was doing there was, you know, one of the things we've noticed is that the fire station data that we started with was very incomplete and had not been maintained. And so I think what he was doing there, that little smaller form you see on the map, he was plotting the location of a missing fire station. But yeah, I couldn't resist not including that one. And so just to give you some sense of what we get back in these maps, you know, I said we hand out colored Sharpies and, you know, here, do this. And so you can see on this one, this happens to be in Northeast Arkansas from one of our meetings, and there's a lot of stuff on that map. And you know, we've got folks there in the office that we take these back, and you know, we've got we were able to add 2 contract staff to work specifically on this project. And one of their jobs is to interpret all that. And so this one was kind of unique. And as you see right there in the middle, you kind of see an X and some lines going in all different directions. Well, what happened there is you've got 2 fire districts that are adjacent to each other. But what they told us is that between this highway and this highway, if there's a fire, and this is a fairly well-populated area just north of this city, if a fire happens here, it's an automatic, you know, an automatic aid type situation where, you know, a fire truck from both departments is going. So we had to reflect. I think I got a zoom. Yeah, there's a zoomed in version of that. So as you can see, the dashed red lines on each side that are drawn in, that's that automatic aid area. And so that's got to be adjusted when we actually get to emergency services zone later on in our actual data that'll be in the RESINet. This is another really interesting example, and don't try to stand on your head to read that. But the reason it's upside down is because a lot of times, you know, we set up tables kind of like this, and our local folks get on one side, and maybe one of our staff's on this side. So that's my handwriting in this one. And so I was on this side of the table, they were on that side of the table. So, you know, I was writing upside down, and one of our contract staff love it when I do this because they're trying to, you know. But in this case, in 18, whatever it was, when these 2 county boundaries, and what you see there is the pink line, the red line is an existing PSAP boundary, sort of that legacy PSAP data we had. And these county boundaries were set 18 whatever based on where the Arkansas River was then. Now, obviously, with channelization and meander and whatever else, the Arkansas River is not where it used to be. It's much straighter now in this area. However, that large area, it's in that curve, is still part of the county to the north. Well, you can't get there from the county to the north. You can only get there from the county to the south. So right now, today, if a 911 call is placed, it's answered in the county to the south of the river. First response is all coming from the county to the south to the river. So this is one of those classic cases. You know, there's a smaller one to the north of the river that's kind of the inverse of this, but we had to, this is another one of those jurisdiction versus response type conversations. Whereas the first deputy sheriff going there is from Yell County, which if any of you are familiar with True Grit, remember Yell County, the movie True Grit? Well, there's Yell County. But the first deputy sheriff, the first ambulance, the first fire truck is all coming from south of the river, even though it's in the county to the north. So it's those types of things we've found, especially along the Arkansas River and the Mississippi River. And when you get along the Mississippi River, it's a whole different set of cases because you're dealing with two states. But this is just one of our textbook examples that we've used over and over and over. So once we got into PSAPs, a parallel effort to what we're doing is, I almost hate to use the word, but it's consolidation of PSAPs, because part of that Act 660 I mentioned earlier, what was mandated in there is that the legislature wanted to see more efficient use of 911 money and things like that. So going into that process, there were 105 primary PSAPs in Arkansas, and the legislation states that, and actually the way it's stated is that the state will fund no more than 77 PSAPs. Well, that's kind of a nuance there, because technically there could still be some number greater than that. It's just that state money is only going to flow to, a certain amount of those. And so that consolidation study was running in parallel the entire time, and the results of that are still ongoing. So we know those PSAP boundaries will change, primarily in counties that maybe had, a county PSAP and a municipal PSAP. And literally, we get up in these meetings, and this ain't about consolidation, because there's, as you can imagine, a lot of emotions surrounding consolidation. So don't look at that too long. You may get busy or something. But going back to Snow Lake, it illustrates a really good example. So here, primarily the county boundaries, you see Snow Lake there on the right-hand side. And what you probably notice in this fairly simple map is there's an area there with no roads. Well, all that kind of blank area is part of a large national wildlife refuge. There's no roads across there. What you also don't see is the Arkansas River bisects right across there, and it's sort of the part of the bluish colored county that extends out to the northeast. That's all still there, but it's across the Arkansas River. Can't get there. The only way to get there is to go north off the screen, cross over into the pink colored county, the very northeast, and come back down from this side of the river all the way up and back down, hour and a half. So obvious emergency response issues there. And just to give you, oh, there it goes. Just to give you some example, all that timbered area you see along the rivers there, like I said, part of a large national wildlife refuge. And just right there around Snow Lake, that's what it looks like. Pancake flat, it's all agricultural land. This is the reality. Again, we weren't making any dramatic changes to the way operations happen. This is another one of those examples where we make the maps to match what's happening in reality today. All emergency services are coming out of the county to the northeast, but these legacy data sets didn't reflect that. So, another thing that we've been working through. And something else you should probably pick up on is another case where these county boundaries, in this case, the state line between Arkansas and Mississippi, in the old meander of the river, and what places either got cut off or even included. And so you notice that tan colored area leaves out that large bend in the river. Well, it's one of those places where it's across the Arkansas River and you can only get there from Mississippi. So getting into now our emergency services, obviously you're all aware of the law enforcement, fire, EMS. So this might be a little hard to see, but this was one of those things where we had to, an EMS layer didn't exist statewide. So we had to go out and scratch around and find the best information we could. Well, the best information we could find was with our state health department, because these services are licensed through the health department. Well, so in this case, I'll explain. There were in this county is in Northeast Arkansas, there were 4 licensed services. In reality, only 2 of those are dispatching ambulances. And we find this all over the state, where you've got, you know, that the one in the upper right, it's red, that's a sort of a volunteer EMS service, and they're only dispatched as backup, sort of, but they're still licensed to operate in that city. Again, it's this whole jurisdictional licensure type thing versus real world dispatch and response. And just to give you an example of what we've started with, this is the reality, you know, from sort of what that looks like to what this looks like. And the actual EMS providers gave us this information. That's how they said, okay, and there's a river channel running up there that's between those 2 shaded areas. And they said, this is how we do it in reality. And so we had to, again, shift from sort of this old legacy way of looking at things to the more operational reality. And again, you can see a significant difference between where the actual state and county line is and what's genuine response area. Some of those areas would actually be responding into Mississippi. Did I miss something? All right, so with the law enforcement, again, no statewide law enforcement layer. So we're finding the best information we could find. The best information we could find was a list of every law enforcement entity in the state, you know, and those are anywhere from a municipal police department to county sheriff's department to, you see a couple of the, you know, constable. That's a whole nother strange thing, but don't make assumptions about what this list said. And this is coming from our Bureau of Law Enforcement Standards, I think is what they're called. Now, these that are highlighted there in yellow, that's the county I grew up in. So there's 2 incorporated towns in the county. The one at the bottom says Kingsland Police Department. In the 47 years that I've been either living there or going there or whatever, there's never been a police department in Kingsland, Arkansas. Why in the world? I mean, maybe there was at one time, or maybe they're somehow authorized by state law to have a police department. The other part of this is where it says Rising Police Department. That one they actually dissolved that police department about a year before we started this. About 6 months before we started this process. And it was one of those issues where very small town and maintaining a police department just got to be too costly for the town. Now they have an agreement with the county to provide all law enforcement. So just because there's a city there doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a police department there. And that's the reality of how that particular emergency services zone for law enforcement is going to work in this county. It's, you know, the whole county instead of being divided up with each city. Now, beware of the enclaves. In the lower left, most of the cities that we work with that have police departments are really good about these areas that are either enclaves or almost enclaves. And, you know, they say, yeah, you know, it makes sense if something happens there, you know, first response, we're going to take care of that. And then you have in the upper right there, this hot, steaming pile of political and personality footballs, and I don't know, but we tried to sort of talk them through this process of, you know, thinking in terms like the one at the lower left, that, you know, this kind of makes sense, but no, that happens to be in the area of West Memphis there in Arkansas, and it doesn't matter that those areas are surrounded by incorporated territory. That's part of the county. We're not going there. And was like, okay, but we hope that at some point, you know, logic maybe will prevail. But this is the way it is for now. You know, and like it just makes us cringe. But you know, it's their show. You know, the locals, and they decide how that's done, and we're okay. Yeah. Oh yeah. We use all tools at our disposal. All right, so with our fire districts, Arkansas is largely rural. The majority of the fire departments, fire districts in Arkansas are volunteer. And so this would be a very typical example of how these are arranged. If you can see, maybe not from the back of the room, but there's a couple of these that say unassigned. What? Yeah. And so these largely follow, you know, either a highway or a river or something like that, but still, this is that idea of, you know, jurisdiction and what's documented for fee purposes versus where's the first fire truck coming from? And so it's continuing with that balance of things. So this is a really fun one. So this is a city in Arkansas. It's just outside of Little Rock. And I mentioned that we had a statewide fire district layer. It was maintained by another agency in the state. And the basic issue was that it was maintained not for emergency services purposes at all. The primary reason that the fire districts layer is maintained, and still is really until we started this, was for it's part of the law enforcement and fire department pension system. And they do some calculations based on this and population, things like that. The biggest problem was that the red shaded area is actual municipal boundaries that we maintain in our office. And we know they're not perfect, but we're fairly confident in those because we've spent a heck of a lot of time researching legal descriptions and making sure and working with these cities to make sure these are in the right places. The red line overlaid, you see, is what is in our statewide fire districts layer. Now, it doesn't take much looking to see that those things don't agree with each other, although they should. And so this has been something that we've been working a lot with. We take these maps out to the local fire departments, and maybe it's the Cabot fire chief. He looks at that and says, "Yeah, no, that's not where that line should be." But so where are we now? We're nearing the completion of the development and the refinement of all those emergency services zones. We had a gap analysis performed, not a lot of validation, so we're now in the process of implementing some of the recommendations that came from that, and preparing to dive headlong into the sort of a synthesis, I guess I could say, of the local data sets, the road center lines and address points with those MSAG, the alley database, those types of things. That's going to be our next big step. And for the most part, just trying to keep our sanity as we go through this stuff. And that's it. I certainly thank you again for being here this morning. If you have a question, be glad to answer it. I may not have a good answer at this point. It's like I may have a better answer at this time next year, but with that, be happy to take any questions. Yeah.
First, thank you. Really insightful. It kind of puts you in the moment of why these things are contentious. But if you could repeat the questions, because people online aren't hearing them. So the question I have is, there was no boxing gloves in those pictures. Really, did you have points where it was contentious?
Oh yeah. It's bare knuckles. There's no boxing gloves in that.
Yeah, it's bare.
What Frank asked is on those, for those local coordination meetings, how contentious were there points of contention, or were those meetings contentious? Asking, he did say he didn't see any boxing gloves, but yes, some of those meetings were quite contentious, and that's why we, at the very beginning of those meetings, we would always say, okay, this is not about consolidation, and that diffuses a lot of it right there, because people are, when it comes to that consolidation, people are losing things, or they think they are. They're really not.
love the idea that you put the paper maps out. That's awesome. We kind of have to do something based on paper maps. So hats off to that.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that? So how moving forward, how about maintenance and automation?
Oh yeah, we're still working that out. Oh, sorry. Greg asked about our own plans for ongoing maintenance and sort of, yeah, how are you going to do that type of question? And the answer is excellent question. I'll tell you next year. I'll tell you next year because I mean, yeah, we're kicking around some things, and obviously, we know, as sitting here this week, I'm watching on screen. I'm like, oh yeah, we got to do that. So I'm getting plenty of ideas. Who's first?
I love that you shared with us the creative places especially in the health departments. Keep that going. And if you have any others right now that were really unexpected sources of information.
Thank you. Oh, and what Susan said that she liked the we get this right, the creative sources of information that we were using to pull these things together. And really we did have to turn over rocks. And there's like, how are we gonna, where is this at? I don't know. Let's start making phone calls, and somebody knows. We just got to find who that somebody is.
I noticed that when they talk about mutual aid now, fire departments are response areas. Did you build that into those data set as far as like one of the one response areas for fire department, but you have what's that fire department? They access other fire departments and they see some of those like those kinds of work. They have a lot of work.
Because the question was about counties with multiple response zones and, where maybe a order about how things are dispatched and things like that. Yes, to a degree. We expect this to be an evolving process for, a long time. And then in addition to that, everything here is great, but in a real sense, there's never going to be a replacement for the expertise and the knowledge and the judgment of that dispatcher sitting there. There's things in there that will probably never be in a map because those things are happening that fast, and they know their operational procedures better than we ever will. There's somebody over there.
How you doing with the PSAP consolidation?
How are we doing with PSAP consolidation? So our 911 board commissioned a consolidation study, and it came back with several recommendations. And so where that process is now is the 911 board has presented those recommendations to all the PSAPs. They're actually in next month, there's actually will be some regional meetings with those PSAPs to further discuss those. But that process right now is the 911 board has laid out the recommendation, and they've said, okay, this is the direction we're going. But what they've done is they've given the PSAPs sort of an appeal process, whereas there's this county up here, and they say, okay, based on this, well, we've got this set up, this county is going to have 2 PSAPs. And this county says, well, wait a minute, we have 5 right now. Why are you just giving us 2? And so there is an appeal process, I guess you could call it, built into that, which will be carried out over the next probably about 12 months. And so what the board has told the PSAPs is, if you think you need your own PSAP, you come to us with a really good justification. You come to us with a justification of why you need that PSAP, and it better be a really good justification. So that's an ongoing process. That will.
Before we take any more in the room, can we check with Jamie? Jamie, does anybody online have any questions for Jonathan?
Thank you, Jenna, for coming over here. I don't see any questions at the moment in the chat from our virtual friends. If you have any questions, you can type them in there or raise your hand.
Thank you, Jamie. Madeline?
Say this is what we heard and how we changed it, and then is there
So we take those paper maps back to the office, scan them in, make changes in the actual data, and then essentially reproduce all those same PDF maps. Again, I mean, not print them, but you reproduce them in PDF and distribute them back out to everybody that's at those meetings. And we say, okay, here's the changes we made. Didn't repeat the question.
Thinking that.
Yeah. Anyway, the question was about what we do, how we distribute those changes that are making back out to the local constituents. And so email those back out. Say, here's a link, go grab your PDFs. Let us know if you think these are correct. And then it's that continual back and forth. And, you know, and we tell them at these meetings, this is not a one shot and done thing. We're not going to make these changes and that's it. You know, I fully expect that the people that understand their areas and know what's out there will continue to see things that maybe they didn't see in these meetings, maybe because someone wasn't at the meeting. And there'll be a dispatcher that says, wait a minute, we need to change this over here. And so that'll be that ongoing. And yeah, we've got, you know, not that it necessarily holds a lot of weight, but at least we've got something with somebody's name on it, you know, form that says, yep, we agree with this.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. I think we're out of time and we're going to switch gears a little bit.
Thank you.